Morning, everyone, and welcome to the first Catalytic Forces 2015. My name is Theo Edmonds, and on behalf of Chris Rackey, Josh Miller, and Ayelet Aldoubi, we very much welcome you and are glad you are here. To start the morning off, Jamie Bennett, the Executive Director of ArtPlace America, could not be here with us today, but he has recorded a message for us, so we'd like to start the day with Jamie.
Hi, I'm Jamie Bennett, Executive Director of ArtPlace America. And one of the things that we talk a lot about as I travel around the country is that artists are actually the one asset that exists in every community. And not every community is lucky enough to be on a waterfront, not every community has strong public transportation, not every community is anchored by a major hospital or university. But every single community has people who sing and dance and tell stories. And those artists are an asset that is present and waiting to be activated for larger purposes. And historically, artists have been disconnected from many of their neighbors. We haven't included artists when we've had community conversations. We haven't included artists when we've talked about the kind of world that we would like to build together. And we certainly haven't included artists in a corporate setting. So repositioning artists as central and a core sector of community planning and development is at the heart of what ArtPlace does. It's at the heart of the creative placemaking movement, and it is certainly what Ideas X is looking to do with all of its work. How do we bring in artists as creative problem solvers? How do we bring in artists to ask questions that have never been asked before? How do we bring them in to engage members of the community? And how do we include them as a core part of the team, whether we're developing our community or whether we're working in a corporate setting?
So I would like to also start the day with a little housekeeping. The restrooms are just out the door here. This day is designed as a day for us to interact with each other, be introduced to each other, and learn about the work of how we can integrate artists into non-traditional platforms with no historical relationship to the arts. On behalf of JP Morgan Chase and Company, we welcome you. They are a presenting sponsor for the day. Also, I would like to welcome Youth Build Louisville and Lynn Rippey and Residency Unlimited, Natalie Sebastian. Youth Build and Residency Unlimited out of Brooklyn are our full operational partners in everything that we do, and we just could not at all do what we do without the support from them, and so we are very appreciative to all of you for that. ArtPlace America, the National Endowment for the Arts, and the Educational Foundation have been critical in allowing what started as an idea about 3 years ago to become work that has been now scaled up, and you'll see in your annual reports there some of the breadth and scope that we've been able to achieve in just a short 3 years. The Creative Agents of Change Foundation and Ideas Kitchen Cabinet. The Creative Agents of Change Foundation is a new nonprofit that we have filed, and our board president, Jim Voiles, along with Kate Hendon and Rosalie Rosenthal, we welcome you here today. Our kitchen cabinet, as we call it, Natalie Onglis, Colleen Keegan, Bob Saunders, Shelley Ziegert, Eric Eicher, Stephen Riley, Venkat, Jakob Shesesny, Laura Callanan, David Pasquale, and John Enix have all contributed to the vision and the reality of that vision coming into affect people's lives today, and we are very appreciative and grateful for that. Mayor Fisher and his staff at Metro Louisville Government, we could not do what we do without you guys, and the vision that you all are showing both on the corporate and the civic side have been exceptional. You've been wonderful partners for us, and we're thankful for that. Our clients that are here today, GE, Humana, and Accelerate Health, you all have taught us so much, and I hope you all have equally learned something from us in this crazy process that you all have signed on for to integrate artists into your corporations. Our civic innovation partners, Bridge Kids International, the Kentucky Center for Performing Arts, Kentucky Center for African American Heritage, Roots and Wings, who did a fantastic performance last night for those who were able to join us for dinner, and the University of Louisville School of Public Health and Information Sciences. Our international partners, the Yale China Association and Le Potager du Roi at Versailles Palace in France, And then lastly, our new operational partners, Center for Nonprofit Excellence and Kentucky to the World. I'm happy to report to you this morning 2 new programs that we are launching. The first is with the Center for Nonprofit Excellence. Over the course of the next 6 months, we will be placing up to 6 artists on nonprofit boards in the city of Louisville with no historical relationship to the arts. We're providing the education and training and ideas for them to go onto the board, and with the Center for Nonprofit Excellence, we'll be working with higher education to actually measure the impact of the creative mind on these boards of directors in Louisville over the next 3 years. Our second program with Kentucky to the World, a well-known speaker series founded by Shelley Ziegert in Louisville, and it has the mission of elevating the profile of Kentucky in the national zeitgeist, raising and elevating people who have strong Kentucky ties and have made significant impacts on the world. We'll be partnering with them in a very unique way. Ideas has an event called Mix and Pivot, where we bring 2 entrepreneurs, 2 artists, and 2 nonprofits together for 5-minute pitches, and then we drink beer. It's proven to be a very effective networking tool for us. And so in partnering with Kentucky to the World, what we're going to be doing is aligning our themed mix and pivots to the speakers that Kentucky to the World will be bringing in over the next year. We'll also be presenting a very special Kentucky to the World and Ideas event in New York at some point in this year, where we will be highlighting Louisville-based entrepreneurs and artists that are emerging and introducing them to the New York scene. So we're very excited about that partnership. In 1666, after the Great Fire of London, Sir Christopher Wren was responsible for rebuilding many of London's churches. And one day, a young boy leaves his mother's home, and he comes up and he asks Christopher, he says, "How may I help you?" And so Christopher, not knowing what to say to him, said, "Well, here, why don't you just take some water? There's lots of people working and they need a drink." So the young boy starts going across the construction site of St. Paul's Cathedral, and he comes up to a stonemason. He asks the stonemason what he's doing, and the stonemason, from a very technical standpoint, describes the engineering that is involved in his job and how precision is important and how his job is what is going to make the cathedral have the structure to maintain and sustain through the years. He comes upon an artist, and the artist explains to him, again in very technical terms, what he is doing and perspective, and how the work of art is really the crowning adornment of a cathedral that connects it to God. And so what he is doing is really what makes St. Paul's St. Paul's. And throughout the day, he continues to one tradesperson after another who all give him very technical answers for what they are doing. He returns to his mother's home, and she says to the boy, she says, "Son, what have you been doing?" And he says, "I've been helping Sir Christopher Wren build a beautiful cathedral." The point being, everyone that the boy talked to had a very specific role, but only the boy who brought the water to them and talked to them and found out what they were doing had that integrative, macroscopic view of what was actually happening. In many ways, I feel like that is the journey that Ideas has been on over these last few years in bringing the worlds of entrepreneurship and artists and innovation together. Next slide. Artists and scientists throughout history have remarked on the bliss that accompanies a sudden creative insight. Einstein described his realization of the theory of relativity as the happiest moment in his life. More poetically, Virginia Woolf once observed how odd the creative power that brings the whole universe to order at once. Creativity and innovation are words that constantly get thrown around in brainstorming sessions and in corporate meetings and company mission statements. But yet, there's no question that these are highly valued things. But very few CEOs probably actually know the full impact of these words that they're using, nor do their employees fully know how to embrace them. And you see it, and I think our educational system is part of the reason. This illustrates America's approach to education over the last 75 years. For nearly 100 years, our educational system has trained all of us for an industrialized economy which depends upon linear progression, minimize deviation from the norm, and educational paths of extreme specialization. Next slide. But something has happened. We no longer live in a linear world. Because of technology, the world that we live in is global and exponential. Entire industries like manufacturing, healthcare, and finance are being disrupted daily by small startup companies. Technology is also accelerating democratization. Google's largest marketplace in the world is Africa right now. In 2010, 2 billion of us were connected online. By 2020, it is estimated that 5 billion people will be connected online. That is 3 billion new creative minds with the same access to artificial intelligence and technology that you and I have today. And so as technology becomes ubiquitous, the only differentiating factor may well be how we use the technology in our hands. Successful businesses and successful communities must think creatively about the future. But few businesses will say that their companies are good at creativity, and I think this is mostly because business is a linear process and creativity is not. In his book, Linchpin, author and innovator Seth Godin wrote, "Our society is struggling because during times of change, the very last people you need on your team are well-paid bureaucrats, note-takers, manual readers, TGIF laborers, map followers, and fearful employees. The compliant masses don't help so much when you don't know what to do next. What we want, what we need, what we must have are indispensable human beings. We need original thinkers and provocateurs. We need people who care. We need marketers who can lead and salespeople able to risk making a human connection. Passionate change makers willing to be shunned if necessary to make a point. Every organization needs a linchpin. One person who can bring it together and make a difference. Some organizations haven't realized it yet, or haven't perhaps articulated it, but what we need are artists. Artists are people with a genius for finding a new answer, a new connection, a new way of getting things done. Next slide. Mel Chin defines art as a catalytic force that allows new options to become visible. The artistic process is an intuitive one guided by human motivation. Synthesize, visualize, create. This is the artistic process. Might it be possible that we have overlooked a mutually beneficial relationship between artist and business? Based on our team's 40,000 plus research hours over the last 3 years, we believe that there is. As an artist and a business person, I know firsthand that artists have an increasingly important role in helping both corporations and communities reframe tough challenges and discover new opportunities. Ideas is an organization created to facilitate this process. We have created a framework that leverages the dynamic capacity of artists to synthesize, that looks for new ways to deploy exponential technology, and a framework that uses a holistic approach to development. Here's just a few examples. As we look at these images, I encourage you to think about the connections and the impact of a world like this. This is Perry Ling. He was one of our guest artists from Hong Kong who spent a month in Smoketown working on a project that blends food systems, environmental science, and technology, and he was teaching it to the kids in Smoketown, where we now sit, which is the oldest African-American community in our city. This is artist Sarah Lyon on the left. She's an artist and also a motorbike mechanic. Sarah Lyon taught a motorbike mechanic training program for young women and women not so young, but young at heart. I see you back there, Lynn Rippey. The intergenerational conversations and skill building and the knowledge transfer that occurs in these moments are a unique skill that artists have to bring to bear. Next slide. What happens when youth educators and their students travel to the Potager du Roi This food and science production garden began by Louis XIV to feed the court of Versailles, to learn how to grow a lot of food on small parcels of land. You think about urban farming today, it sounds very familiar. For the last 2 years, our educators and students have traveled to the Potager to learn from their educators. This year, 2 of the landscape architects from there actually traveled back here and are working on a mutually beneficial project with our Smoketown community. What happens when the inventor of the world's skinniest house, architect and artist Jakub Szczesny, comes to Louisville to work inside of GE's innovation section called First Build? What happens when Jakub works side by side young designers who are starting out their career? What is the impact on those young professionals over the course of the next 20, 30, and 40 years of their professional life? What happens when a social media artist out of Brooklyn takes over a local media outlet to discuss the prevalence of diabetes? Diabetes right now is a global epidemic. 382 million people around the world have diabetes. It is estimated that by the year 2020, 1 in 3 Americans will be diabetic or pre-diabetic. Over $400 billion was spent in the U.S. system on direct and indirect care last year from diabetes alone. An artist taking over a local news outlet is starting that conversation in a southern town. What happens when a group of artists partner with one of the top insurance companies, healthcare insurance companies in the country, in a town in southern Mississippi called Natchez, to help that town become 20% healthier by the year 2020? Artists have a very unique and human way of reaching people where corporations cannot. These are just a few examples of the many ways that we see artists as uniquely qualified in activating shared value between corporations and communities. In recent years, business has been criticized as a major cause of social, environmental, and economic problems. Companies are widely thought to be prospering at the expense of the communities in which they reside. A big part of the problem lies with the companies themselves, which remain trapped in outdated, narrow approaches to value creation. Focused on optimizing short-term financial performance, they overlook the greatest unmet needs of the market, as well as the broader influences of their long-term success. Why else would companies ignore the well-being of their customers, the viability of their suppliers, and the economic and social distress of the communities in which they produce and sell? It does not have to be this way. Working together, companies and artists can bring business and communities back together if we focus on creating the shared value I've been speaking of. Generating economic value in a way that also produces value for a community by addressing its challenges. A shared value approach, reconnecting companies and society, reconnecting America to social progress. Ideas is a distinctly human approach to creating shared value between companies and communities. And we focus on the artist as the activator. With new forms of training and the new opportunities that Ideas and its clients are developing, artists can become a catalytic force of integrative macroscopic thinkers. We can help corporations and simultaneously alleviate inequalities in our systems and build healthier communities. A creative, healthy, and productive workforce is our goal. Last year, the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation commissioned a program to build a healthier America. It called for a broad range of sectors, including community development, public health, healthcare, education, transportation, urban planning, business, and others, to work together to create healthier communities. The collaboration was groundbreaking, and its central aim was a culture of health that enables all of us to live longer, healthier lives. We were deeply inspired by this Robert Wood Johnson model. And so arising out of it, as well as arising out of our engagements where we have placed artists in working with Humana and GE and Accelerate Health, today we're excited to announce our new initiative, a Blueprint for Cultural Health. The Blueprint for Cultural Health will be an important pillar of IDEA's work over the coming years. By actively engaging artists at the 12 nodes of our plan, we endeavor to determine how artists can play a role in measurably improving the health and creativity of the American workforce. IDEAS will offer education and training for artists who wish to work inside of the framework that we have created, a framework which allows artists to partner with industry sectors that historically have no formal relationship to the arts. Whether you're a large national health insurer, a small self-funded employer, a mother, or an artist, health is a democratizing factor that affects us all. It is a business issue, a profit issue. It's a social justice issue, a race and class issue. It is the most important challenge facing our American workforce. If we are not healthy, we are unable to earn a living and care for our families. We see health as the ultimate shared value between communities and corporations, from manufacturing to the tech sector. We see it as shared value between government leaders and educators, and statistics show that what we have been doing for the past many years to create a healthy and more innovative America has only met with limited success. As one lady in Natchez, Mississippi told me, we know we're not healthy, but here in the South we have traditions. Telling us to eat more kale and to walk more is not going to catalyze change. If you want to make a difference, she said, it can't be just about one thing. It has to be about everything. This is where we see the biggest opportunity for artists and corporations to partner together. We artists have long been at the vanguard of exploring big questions and embracing broad-scale changes and seismic shifts in culture. So let us turn our unique talents to becoming partners with corporations and communities alike in taking on some of the biggest challenges facing our American workforce. I challenge artists today to become that catalytic force that allows new options to become visible in America. Today we are going to be having a very interactive day and a series of panels. To guide the panels, we are very fortunate and blessed to have with us a lady who has been fundamental in guiding IDEAS over the last 3 years. I'd like to introduce to you and have her share her experience with you, Ms. Kalinke. So if the panel could go ahead and come up to take their places, please.
It's an honor to be here because this has been extraordinary to watch. No place else has there been such a partnership of artists and corporations, the government, community organizations, and foundation support to make a new model, to move away from the classic patronage and instead create something that is truly innovative, truly meaningful, and elevates everybody. It is also surprising to see the leadership, the courage, and the commitment that people have brought, and the willingness to take a risk at something that has never been successful before. I particularly want to hear from the panel what brought them to this experiment and what have been the biggest surprises to date. Eric?
Thank you. My name is Eric Aker. I work at Humana. I've had the pleasure of working with now Theo and Josh and the other folks at IDEAS and XLab for over a year now. Our work got started because of a need in a place called Mississippi, where Humana, our company, was interested in learning a bit more about what makes health happen. It was a new place for us to go into, became really urgent that we learn more about the cultural implications that create health and create poor health. We all know that Mississippi has some of the poorest rankings when it comes to health outcomes and health behaviors. And we wanted to go in there and make a big impact. Because we knew if we can make a big impact there, we can make a big impact anywhere. We were really excited that, we knew that in order to achieve change, partnership was absolutely vital. And of course, in the early days, our partnership list was the typical public health departments, the hospitals, maybe the educational system, the not-for-profits in the community, but it didn't come until maybe a little bit too late, this idea that artists, and what a eureka moment. Artists are part of this community that can really make a big impact, and I'd like to share more about that as the day goes on.
Fantastic. Venkat?
So, my name is Venkat. I work for GE, and I also work in an entity called First Build, which is about 2 miles from here. And what we do is we are like an incubator, like an innovation lab, like a small startup within GE. And our main objective is, can we explore innovation? Can we get more innovative products that we can make and manufacture in our factories in the US? And that was our main objective. So we started about a year ago. So,
It adds excitement.
So we started the entity about 14 months ago, and one of the main values of that entity called First Build is that we were very open. We wanted to be open, and we wanted to get ideas from anybody out there on what the next generation of products would be. And so day one, even when the building was getting ready, we partnered with Ideas 40203, and artists were very important to us because they represent the very, I think, the nascent form of creativity. They come up with ideas, and a lot of times you don't understand, and then you sit with them, talk to them, and they put it in context, and then you get an idea of how it could impact the world and how it could impact products. So we started off with an art exhibition. So when the facility opened, the only pieces of art in our facility was from local artists, which Josh and Theo had curated. And then we went on, and there was an opportunity to do an artist in residence program. And I think Jakob will be Skyping in from Europe later today. And so we got Jakob in, and for a week we didn't know what we were going to do. And we figured out we actually created a product. And now we are sort of digesting and assimilating that whole experience. And now we are working towards the next steps. So for us, it was more of how do we infuse creativity into our organization, and how do we change our mindset on how we create products.
Fantastic. Jackie?
Hi, I'm Jackie Wilmot. I'm a clinical nurse specialist. I've worked in a large organization, Humana, for 15 years. And as a domain expert, it's really easy to fall into the rut of feeling like you know what's best for the community or the customer that you're going to deliver a product to. And I've always been passionate about looking through a different lens, and I think artists are able to do that. I work with Accelerate Health, as well as Bob does as well. And we feel so privileged to be able to work with Theo to bring artists to the table. We have one company, last year at Accelerate Health, Gyroscope. The gentleman was a musician, and he had a label in town, then went to work at Signature for about 5 years. And he applied to Accelerate Health, and just looking at the product that he was developing made the hair stand up on my arms. It was so fundamentally different than what those of us that are working in the industry would create. And it was interesting because he never identified himself as an artist when he introduced himself. He always identified himself as a business person because I think he thought that would give him more credibility. And he just told me recently, one of the medical directors at a large organization here in Louisville was sitting down with him, and he found out that he was an artist, and the physician said, "Why have you not told me that before? That's such a much more interesting story, and it really makes sense about how you develop this product, because it is so different." So I guess my point there is just artists can make a fundamental difference in the products and the services that we're creating today. And with the obesity and the diabetes rate rising, and JAMA just released a study in September that we're way ahead of goal. We're now 1 in 2 people have prediabetes or diabetes. And it's because the people that are out there working on it today aren't solving the problem. And I have real faith in why we worked with Theo and Josh and Man to look at diabetes through the lens of an artist. And we have a lot more work to do in that space, and I look forward to doing that with IDEA.
Thank you. Bob?
So, I'm Bob Saunders. I'm also one of the co-founders of Accelerate Health. Actually,
Ted.
we
Ted
have
is, yeah.
Ted is not on the panel because he's on too many panels. And I have my microphone off to avoid the feedback, which otherwise would blast all of us. But if you can't hear me, let me know. So, there was the lunch panelists yesterday at IDEA Festival. Was anyone here who is here in the room spoke to the issue of intelligence, and his point was that kind of the standard notions of intelligence ignore a lot about how the brain works, and in particular how the creative portion of the brain works, and that is sort of an under kind of celebrated element of the definition of intelligence. I think at Accelerate Health we have long realized that to create successful entrepreneurial enterprises, you have to mix creativity with the more traditional concepts of technology and technological intelligence to have something that works that the market cares about and wants. And so from the very beginning of Accelerate Health, we thought it was kind of important to incorporate the creative, and we sort of engaged with ideas from the very beginning. So we've engaged with ideas in a number of ways, some of which Jackie has talked about. Like First Build, we're a venue for the celebration of local artists. Our space is a very cool space because it's got a very odd vibe to it. It has art continuously and everywhere displayed, which Ideas helps us curate and rotate through. And there's one piece in particular, which Theo himself was the artist, that we sort of saw at Idea Festival a few years back and insisted it needed to be in the space. It's a three-dimensional piece of art that is kind of, it just sort of fits in our space. It is, I invite you to come to the space and decide for yourself. It's a very sort of interesting, edgy, three-dimensional piece of art, which was on the stage at Idea Festival and now is permanently displayed. But in any event, there is a sort of an engaging vibe that comes from having art interact with what activity entrepreneurs are engaged with. That's sort of one of our forms of engagement with the artistic community that Ideas represents. Second is that we've been the host to various kind of co-sponsored events. In particular, Mix and Pivot has been in our space, a couple of times now? It's sort of the perfect place to have this interaction of entrepreneurship and art. And in fact, one of our interns, who is a woman who is completing her PhD in neuroscience from Yale, one of the presentations was about her interest in a particular form of slime mold, yes. I was going to say a particular form of fungal life. In this instance, it happens to be slime mold. Anyhow, slime mold has its own sort of native intelligence. She has demonstrated, she does this at the Science Center from time to time, how slime mold can replicate, just by its natural kind of formation, the subway system of Tokyo in terms of a network design. I mean, it's a natural representation of an optimal network design. It's very bizarre. Anyhow, that was a presentation at Mix and Pivot in our space where sort of ideas came together with Accelerate Health. That's thing two. Thing three, we have sponsored in one of our companies, a company that's focused on diabetes, as Jackie mentioned, an artist in residence who came from New York, Man, who worked with us on sort of building awareness around this very, very devastating disease that is becoming so rampant in the United States and around the world. So, there have been a number of surprises. I can't answer the question, what's the surprise? The surprise is, hey, this all sort of fits together. There's no plan. It's like slime mold.
We're going to pass the mic and turn off the live. What do you think are the challenges in terms of scaling up? I mean, what have been the direct benefits and the collateral benefits, and what do you think the challenges moving forward?
Well, let me start first with saying that, the biggest challenge for the corporation has been, we've been operating in this clinical model for decades around how do you improve health, and you do that through the clinical side, through providers. So you contract with doctors, you contract with hospitals, and you send the members that way. We are now lucky to be in a position where we are seeing members stay with us a lot longer, so we can start investing in them and their health and starting to try to prevent conditions from happening in the first place. And the ability to do that on the ground in a community, which is a new focus for us, is really the only way. You can only influence somebody's health if you can influence their surroundings, their environment, people with whom they interact. And there's no better way to do that than through engagement. I think if we cannot get engagement of people into their health, we will never make a change. And I believe that it's artists more than pretty much any other community stakeholder. But there is some partnership involved, but artists have the most opportunity to engage people into their health. And the challenge with that is, how do you create a scalable, replicable platform that enables that? And as a corporation, I don't think you can do that alone. You definitely have to have another entity, a linchpin organization like X Labs or like 40203, to be that entity that brings the parties together. And so I think we need more ideas, 40203s and X Labs, to do this type of work. And I hope that, and I should also say that the work that was done in the community initially was, we brought in an external artist from New York, Corin Shadmi, who did a wonderful job of sitting and listening to the community and the ways that they themselves have found ways to overcome health and the barriers to health. And that's a great way to get things started as a catalyst, but I think ultimately we want to engage more and more of the local artists in the community, because I think the arts have the potential to cure diabetes. I think, if you think about the ways that they can engage storytelling, they can engage you in motion, the performing arts, they can inspire you. There's real potential there, and I'd like to see that through in a community and then get that scaled.
Okay. So the question on challenges, I think, there are two perspectives. There are not too many challenges. I think the question is, how do we find a path? And the best way to describe how do we find a path is, I don't know if you can relate to it, but I come from a different country. My mother tongue is different. So to give you an analogy, so if you go to someone who's a Korean origin, right, you speak to them in English, they speak English, and you talk to them about some concept. What they do is they hear you, they take it into their head and translate it into Korean. They think through the whole thing. They find an answer in Korean, and then they translate it back to English and speak it out to you. In the process, there are two translations. And the two translations, the intent is great, they want to do it, but the words that come out are completely different. Okay, so if you think in English and you speak in English, it's easier, but so that's exactly what happens. So the artists and Theo and Josh and Ayelet, they come to you and they speak. I hear it. We have all the good intent of working together. We turn it into GE speak, and we process it in GE speak, and we come back and say something else, and then Theo says, I thought you were my friend. What happened? So I think partly it's a translation, understanding each other. And we did the artisan residence, and we have spent like 4 months now discussing a MOU and what we do next. And that has been the source of the thing, and we are working through that. So it means more conversations. And then the other one is, I think everyone in this room agrees, and everyone I talk to within GE, outside GE, they all agree that there is a lot of potential. There's a lot of potential in this partnership and us working together. But what is the path? It is a wide open space. How do we get there? And finding the first path or taking the first step, we took the first step. Now taking the second step is the challenge. So that is in a way summarizes, how do we discuss, how do we understand each other, and how do we find a path?
I guess my biggest challenge currently is funding and being able to show or demonstrate a proof of concept that artists at the table really make a difference. I've acquired an asset that was developed inside Kraft Foods. It's a really simple food score, basically, for people with diabetes that takes the nutritional label and makes it very simple for them to choose foods. And we're currently trying to raise money from institutional investors, angel investors. And we're in this situation now where they need to believe that the product will be engaging and get people to come onto the platform and continue to use it. And that's one of the biggest issues in healthcare, is that people build stuff and folks use it for a little bit, but they don't stick with it. And so for this to really work, it's got to be different than anything that's out there. And I believe with all my heart that if I had an artist at the table, that would happen, but I don't have the funding to get somebody at the table. So that's my biggest challenge. And then I think just it ties into visibility, kind of my example, the artist that started his own business. And Theo has all these degrees and he's an artist, and there's lots of artists inside organizations, but they kind of hide under the business title or role. And for artists to be viewed and respected at the table, I think they also need to take responsibility to let people know that they're artists, and to keep that visible every day so people recognize those that are already out in organizations really do make a difference and contribute in a different way.
So in Accelerate Health, Jackie talked about one particular company, but we've worked with literally dozens of companies. The model that we use is called the Lean Startup model. I don't know if any of you are familiar, I know some of you probably are, with the Lean Startup model, but the challenge that the Lean Startup model poses is a challenge of understanding pain in the marketplace. The whole concept is about customer discovery. The traditional approach in Silicon Valley is, somebody has an idea, they raise a bunch of money, they work in a stealth mode for a couple of years, create some really cool technology, expose it to the world, and then hopefully the world doesn't go, yeah, but that's really boring and we don't care. So you can literally waste tens of millions of dollars creating a cool technology that is not interesting to the market. So the concept of Lean Startup, which was developed in Silicon Valley around software businesses, applies to almost any kind of business. It says, don't develop the technology until you understand the marketplace, until you understand what people want, what the customer is looking for, what in particular the customer's pain point is. And discovering customer pain is not easy. It means you go out and engage literally hundreds of people in dialogue and discussion to understand how they think about the particular problem set that you're trying to solve. And that's what artists do. They sort of help understand the voice of the marketplace in terms of its pains, wants, needs. And there is a close kind of relationship between the thought process that we try and push our companies to go through, and the thought process that an artist goes through in thinking about the message that he wants to get across. That is a big challenge, because too often entrepreneurs are very directional and they think they know the answer, and what you have to sort of persuade them is that their belief about the answer may or may not be correct. It's a hypothesis, and what you then have to do is go examine that hypothesis with the people who you're trying to engage. And yeah, sure.
The little title under your name for this panel is investor,
Yeah.
not Accelerate Health. So maybe you want to add something about being a venture capitalist.
Okay, I forgot to look. Yeah. So I talked a little bit about in Silicon Valley and elsewhere, what venture capitalists often historically have done is throw a lot of money at cool technologies. The loss ratio, which is a number that everybody in venture capital measures, is the percentage of the companies that you invest in, or the percentage of the dollars that you invested that you eventually throw away and write off. The loss ratio typically in venture capital is about 45%. 45% of the companies that particularly early stage venture capital, startup companies that venture capitalists back, wind up being complete zeros. The concept of a lean startup is to lower the loss ratio so that you sort of enhance the probability of success by forcing the business to be more attuned to the market. And as a venture capitalist, the extent to which you can reduce the loss ratio has a direct result in the sort of success of your outcome in terms of return on the investment that you're making. So, it goes right to, my kind of greedy kind of predispositions as a venture capitalist to succeed by trying to force businesses that we work with to have a grasp of, the marketplace and what it wants. So.
You all talked about the importance of ideas or a conduit to train the artists going into the company. After the leadership buy-in, is there much training for the workforce, for the people in the company, in terms of making this work?
I like Jackie's idea about finding these artists that exist, without a doubt, in the companies and inspiring them. What's happened as a result of the work that we've done in Mississippi is that just through our own internal communications and through social media, we've inspired dozens of associates in our company to raise their hand and say, how can I get involved? Not necessarily just in Mississippi, but in my own communities. So I think that this work has engaged not only the leadership, who are raising their eyebrows and saying, wow, that's an interesting concept, but more importantly, it's engaging the workforce. I mean, 80, 90% of any given company's employees are basically asked to take a coloring book and color within the lines. And I think now more and more people are raising their hands and saying, hey, I have a sketch pad. I can do some of this stuff myself, and we can actually start changing the culture, because it can't all come from the outside. We need that catalyst. We need the platforms. We need the connections to the artists out there. But we also need to change the culture within the company. So it's important to also nurture artists within.
For us, I think for us it has happened sort of organically. So Jakub was here, and Jakub brought a lot of people from within the community into our working space. And now if you walk into our facility on a Saturday, at least there are 2 or 3 people who are doing art there on their own. We have a student who's doing painting on tiles or art on tiles, and we have a number of things. So it has organically grown, and it's making a big impact for us. So it is sort of, and we are amazed by it, because every week we get about 5 or 6 artists there who are doing different things, and they collaborate with our employees. And so we can see it growing, and hopefully we can add some amount of encouragement to that whole effort. And that's what we plan to do next. So it is causing a huge change.
I think, and Theo, if you don't mind me using our first example of having an artist at the table and just being a little bit transparent about some of the challenges. What was difficult for me, kind of sitting at the side of the corporation, I really wanted something different to come out of it, and I wanted to sit back enough to let that flow, but I also have corporate goals in from the organization that I have to hit, whether it be from a time period or a financial period. And so that was one challenge for me, is being able to step back and let the artists kind of do their stuff and explore different areas. Even so, though some of those areas were somewhat uncomfortable for me, and in hindsight, there were some that really fit well with the organization. There's some just related to the condition we were addressing, maybe were a little bit off. So I think the challenge is having the artist and maybe the domain expert, and this situation might have been clinically related, to be able to make sure that they're communicating. I think that's the second thing, is just business acumen around working in an organization. And if the artist has always been out working on their own and have never had kind of the, like the corporate training you get when you start working at Humana, there's just certain things that you do and don't do. But one of those is staying in communication and being very clear and always connecting back and making sure that you're on the same path, even though, or you want to hit the same goal, even though your path might be a little different. And so I think there is some type of training. I'm not quite sure what it is. I certainly need as much training and learning from the artist as maybe they do from a business acumen standpoint. I just think clear communication and frequent sit-downs would help with that. Maybe not a formal training, but just an understanding.
Yeah, I mean, reflecting on what Jackie said, one of the things that artists often do is they sort of are sort of, it's a lonely kind of activity to be an artist. Once you've absorbed, you sort of go into the mode of creation and expression. And one of the things that you sort of need to we've worked with a couple of artists in residence, is kind of help persuade them that the unnatural act of communication before you're done is something that the artist needs to, in the business context, remember. And that's been something that it's an ongoing kind of piece of work for all of us to sort of get that communication task right. Similarly, though, communicating with entrepreneurs who also have this sort of, I'm very goal-directed. Once I've, kind of heading down my path, I'm really, just leave me alone. I'm going to go do it. And we've had a very hard job in every one of our classes. We're in our third year, our third cohort, persuading these highly sort of focused entrepreneurs, sometimes kind of people with very technical backgrounds, to sort of check back, explain what they think they're learning, and open themselves up to kind of challenge, discovery, communication. And each class of entrepreneurs, each cohort that we do this with, there's sort of a life cycle, which is there's disbelief. They don't like the method. They think they know what they're doing. We have one and it happens every year. We have one guy who he's a data scientist. He very focused, and you get to about half to two-thirds through the program. There's great resistance, and ultimately say, you know what? I sort of get that. Oh yes, this is different, but it's working. And by the end of the program, they're embracing the methodology and the approach, which is a very sort of two-dimensional approach. And we've found this each time, and it's sort of just a surprise that you get to this epiphany along the way that kind of the approach, the method that we're sort of pushing actually works, and that by leaving behind kind of the way you've traditionally done things and sort of embracing a new approach can be kind of liberating. Anyhow.
Fantastic. Now, I know there's a million questions, but we have time for one or two from the audience, if anybody has a question for the panel. Yes.
I was listening, it struck me, Jackie and Bob, as you guys were talking
Yeah, I think that's a really good idea. It sounds similar to how business sometimes works with technology. There's a person in the middle that translates and serves as a concierge, if you will, and that's a good idea for a model to help people kind of go where they need to go without diluting what they're doing, yeah.
So, what we try and do in our activity is we use mentors and coaches who basically play the role of the kind of independent, objective third party who sort of kind of asks the difficult questions and tries to force people to at least think about whether or not, that you need to pivot somewhere along the way. And so, I think we very much believe that sort of this external kind of coaching intervention is helpful in sort of the creative process.
Ted has a question.
I do. It's a question for Venkat, so he can continue to hold the microphone. It's really interesting. So in GE in particular, it's a great example of a company that's embraced design. And in fact, design is infectious. So if you go out to Silicon Valley, IDEO is a tremendous force, and it's filled with people that do nothing but design work, right? And they're often invited into contexts where there are a lot of engineers who ruin stuff regularly with math. And so that was the cure. We'll just be design. So Stanford has committed themselves to design thinking, design in everything, design in business, design in policy, right? And so I'm a little confused, and it might be helpful if we can sort of parse out, sort of what do you like about having design and industrial designers and design as a technical activity, and then what do you like about art in its, I think, more native understanding of unbound creative expression or whatever. Help us with that, Venkat.
So it's interesting, yes, there is an inherent conflict, and it's not design and engineering, design and executing, right? So designers come up and they dream what it should be, and there is someone who has to make it work. So there's an inherent conflict, right? So you can dream about it, but can't make a perpetual motion machine, But on the other hand, it was very interesting when Jakub was in our facility. There was a big conflict between our industrial designer and the artist, because now we added one more leg, one more front end. So now Jakub came up with this table, and the designer said, "Oh my God, how do I make it usable?" And then down the chain, the engineer said, "How do I fabricate it?" So that I think that is a way we have learned to visualize it, and I think it is so the designers were stretching our boundaries on what is possible. Can you make it work? Can I make this appliance that does everything? And we come and say, how do you do that? Now, when we get in art, the artist comes and says, "Oh no, it's a totally different world. Imagine you're on a different planet," and the designer says, "I don't know that planet. How do I get there?" So it's interesting. So one of the reasons why we do art, and it's a good question, Ted, is I think that is the next frontier. I think art will drive design, which will drive engineering. So if you look at Apple, design drives their engineering, and I think we come to the next frontier, and that is one of the reasons we are interested in this whole initiative, is because I think art will drive design, which will drive engineering, which will drive manufacturing, and give better products to the world.
In this process over the last year, it's been a negotiated conversation between us as an artist-driven group and the corporations. We've learned too. And Bob and Jackie were one of the earlier ones. And so it was through their engagement that we actually learned that, hey, we need this more hands-on framework around the artist to manage this to a productive end. So from that engagement, we got more intentional about the framework we were putting in place. And so the next one, Ayala, as curator, was talking to the artist pretty much every single day. I was talking to the corporation pretty much every single day. And then at least a couple times a week, we were all talking to each other. And that was a very crucial thing, because I think Jackie's impulse was to turn the artist into someone who's doing the lean startup stuff. And so, I mean, this conversation of this past year has been really interesting. And Ted, to your point, what I've noticed in higher education, there's a real move in art schools to make all artists designers, because seems to be a job market there. But if you look at the job market for designers, even that's becoming saturated, right? And while they can be the same person, I think they're very, as an artist myself, I think they're very unique and different skill sets. And to put a fine point on it, just from my own standpoint, the one difference I would make is that I think artists are more of these integrated macroscopic thinkers who can see how systems touch each other, and then how those systems might be integrated with each other, and then use visual language as a form of communication to communicate those things back in a way that others can understand.
It's also creating a new model for artists and elevating artists. And increasingly in the marketplace, we see companies like Kickstarter started by an artist who's then returned to his work. I mean, we're cultivating a workforce both ways, which is extraordinarily exciting in this new model. Thank you very much. So we are... While we call the Civic Innovation panel up, I would like to ask, I mean, this is really all about everybody in this room. We would like to ask the audience to stand and introduce themselves and tell what they're affiliated with. Give everybody a moment to stretch and to see who's here. Would you like to start? Would you like to start? Yeah. Oh, that's okay. So just want to introduce yourself. We're just going to have everybody stand and introduce